Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome everybody to today's Fortuna Admissions webinar. Over the next hour, we're going to have two former admissions gatekeepers, one from Insead, one from London Business School, who'll be sharing their experiences of what it was like to actually assess candidates for admission to those schools. But just a few quick words about Fortuna first. The firm was started about 5 years ago by former directors of admissions, and it was sort of a dream team of former adcoms who've been gatekeepers at a dozen of the top 15 business schools. So they pretty much know what goes on once you submit an application and how it's actually evaluated by the admissions team. So only until recently, they were literally reading your file, sitting across from you in interviews and making decisions about whether to accept or, God forbid, ding you. I would have to say that that is the firm's true differentiation, the fact that you're getting advice from people who sat in the chairs of the admissions committee, which is clearly different from almost any other leading admissions consulting firm. So let me introduce our two terrific guests today. One, my near Bay Area neighbor, Drt Edwards, who had been Director of Admissions, Marketing, and Financial Aid at Insead from 2005 until 2012, a job that she absolutely loved, I know, as a matter of fact. She was the primary gatekeeper for the school and shaped much of the school's admissions policy. She holds an MBA from, guess where, Insead, and she completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. Caroline has also worked as a management consultant and a development officer for the International Finance Corporation. She's lived and worked in 9 countries across 3 continents. And in fact, I first met her at her home in India, where she generously invited me for dinner on a visit. So welcome, Caroline.
Thank you very much, John.
Good to always see you. And I love to hear that accent in your voice.
I don't have the accent. It's you who has the accent.
And here comes another accent, Emma Bond. Emma Bond was senior manager at London Business School with responsibility for full-time MBA admissions. She stays in close contact with the school, as does Caroline at Insead. So she brings a really unique breadth of knowledge and experience in how LBS really looks at candidates and evaluates them. She has also worked as a European recruitment manager for Boston Consulting Group. She's originally from New Zealand, and she now lives in the UK, where I just had spent the last 6 days and returned to the States only 2 days ago. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, so now let's take a look for everyone at our agenda today. We want to cover, what are the top schools looking for? How can candidates stand out in the applicant pool? What are common mistakes that applicants make, particularly at Insead and LBS? What's a good timeline for application planning? And then we're going to finish with you. We're going to allow you to ask questions, any question you might want to ask of either Caroline or Emma. And we'll get to those at the end. Now, if you have any technical issues, we have someone who is not on the screen who's going to help us out, and you can send her a direct note in the chat box. Her name is Haley Mitchell. Thanks, Haley. We'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for your questions. You can type them at any time, however, during the session into the questions box on the control panel on your screen. And we will try to answer as many as we possibly can in the last 15 minutes. And finally, if you have to sign off early, we're recording a session, of course, and you'll be able to find the full version on fortunaadmissions.com. So you can just check it out there. And if you're busy at work, your boss is suddenly coming to your desk and peeking over your shoulder, and you need to get to do something else, well, no problem. Just come to the fortunaadmissions.com website and you can catch it all later on. Okay, let's start. So Caroline, why would an MBA candidate choose to study at Insead or London Business School rather than a so-called M7 school in the United States?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I think, there are a lot of commonalities across these schools. So, if you go to Insead or go to London Business School, you'll be getting the same quality of curriculum, the same quality of faculty, students, the wider community that you would expect at one of the M7 schools. So in terms of the experience, it's at the same level, and the schools have the same sort of international reputation. I think that the key difference is that, you're part of a very international community, and the international diversity is a key part of the learning experience at these schools. So, at Insead and London Business School, you'll be in a classroom with, 50, 60, 70, 80 different nationalities. You'll have, there'll be no dominant culture, no dominant nationality in the classroom. So typically sort of, maybe 10% is the maximum number of any individual nationality. So that creates an incredible melting pot on campus, and adds a lot to the learning experience. So I think, the reason to choose Insead and London Business School is because you want that kind of international exposure, and that has some relevance to your career path. What I hear from people who go to Insead, and also from people who teach at Insead and London Business School versus faculty who teach in the US, is that having that kind of rich international mix in the classroom creates the kind of magic where you have extraordinary diversity of perspectives, and that can be very challenging, and it's often a very tough environment for the professors to teach in, because they can't always predict the reaction and perspectives that students may have, and it can be very challenging to have so many different angles and viewpoints, and trying to bring all those together. So there's less likely to be a sort of groupthink process where people come to the same conclusion quite quickly, and that can sometimes be difficult to work with, because you'll be in a team with people who have very different cultural background to you, very different expectations on how a team works together and how a team functions together. So sometimes it's going to be tough, but at the end of the day, you'll come out with the ability to work effectively across cultures, which in today's global environment, and also in an uncertain world, it's great to have an international platform that's open to you. So these schools also have great recruitment relationships with recruiters around the world, with great companies. So rather than having your opportunities post MBA focus in a local market, you'll have access to fantastic opportunities really around the world. And so that's, a great springboard to an international career. Great.
Emma, is it easier to get into LBS and Insead than it would be a top US school?
I think that's a good question. There's always, as long as I've been involved in admissions, there's been this perception that it's much easier to get into European schools, to LBS and to Insead, than it is to get into the M7 schools. And I just, having worked at LBS, I just simply don't believe that's the case. I think Caroline and I would both attest to the rigour of the application process at both these schools. In terms of sheer volume of application numbers, yes, sometimes making the first cut might seem like a monumental task at the M7 schools, but we've seen both those schools, LBS and Insead, attract an increasing number of applications over the past couple of years. So that, of course, is putting a squeeze on the number of offers in terms of the percentage of people that get through. And I think it's fair to say that, in terms of academic ability, in terms of the quality of your application, the level of self-reflection and the time that you need to put into your application to be successful at LBS and Insead is at least equivalent to the M7 schools. And so I think it's, if you're expecting an easy ride to get into LBS and Insead, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed. And I think, in that respect, sometimes people who are looking to apply to a bunch of schools will perhaps focus quite early on in the process on the M7 schools, and they'll leave the European schools until later. And they really do themselves, a disservice, because you need to put as much time and effort into those applications as you do for the M7. So yeah, I think it's a common misconception, and probably about time it got debunked, to be fair.
I've also seen a number of people over the years who've applied to M7 schools and have been accepted there and rejected by LBS or Insead. So, you know, that makes the case pretty clearly. So Caroline, what's the difference in terms of what an admissions committee is actually looking for in a candidate between the admissions people at LBS and Insead versus the other M7 schools? Isn't the same type of qualities, Caroline?
Right. Well, I mean, there are a number of commonalities. So all of these schools, M7 or Insead London Business School, are going to be looking at a number of common factors. So they'll be looking at academic track record. So, you know, these are very rigorous academic programs and they want strong academic credentials. So they'll be looking at where you studied, the quality of the institution you attended, what you studied. They'll be, you know, looking through your transcript, looking through your grades, looking at your GPA. And then, of course, there's a Gmat or the GRE. So they'll expect, you know, strong showing on all of those elements. Then they'll be scrutinizing your professional track record. So, you know, the admissions committee takes the perspective that your past experience and past achievements are the best predictor of your future potential in terms of your professional career. So they'll be looking for, you know, really concrete evidence of strong progression. They're not looking for any particular type of professional experience. I mean, quite to the contrary, you know, all of these schools want to put together a classroom of people from very diverse professional backgrounds. But, you know, the common element is the strength of that experience and the quality of your experience. So beyond academic and professional, then the schools will be looking at, you know, extracurriculars and more broadly, you know, what do you bring to the school and what kind of student you will be, and will you fit well with the community? So, you know, those are commonalities that you will see at the M7 and then also at the international schools. So what is different is really the weight that's put on the international dimension. So, Insead, I mean, Insead talks about the 4 pillars in their evaluation process, and those 4 pillars are the academics, professional, the fit with the school community, and then the international experience. And so, you know, that is given a lot of weight. And, you know, whereas international experience is also valued, if you're applying to an M7 school, and the top US schools, you know, do appreciate the value of an international perspective and experience and you know, the experience that brings to the classroom. It's more of a nice to have rather than a must have. So Insead London Business School really want to see evidence that, you know, you've spent some significant time outside of your home country, that you've worked or studied, and they want to see, you know, not just that you've clocked time abroad, but actually what have you got out of that and what have you learned from that? And, you know, as a result, what experiences will you be able to share with people in the classroom, and how will that perspective enrich the debate in the classroom, and also, you know, enrich the life of the community more broadly? So that can be challenging for some candidates. You know, the average amount of international experience at these schools, at Insead London Business School, is, you know, pretty impressive. But not everyone has that. And, you know, the school takes that into account. So, you know, not every candidate has had the opportunity to spend a lot of time outside of their home country for perhaps for economic reasons, family background reasons, you know, family responsibilities and so on. So the admissions committee will take that into account. And if that is the case, then you need to really communicate strongly and convince the school why being part of such an international community is relevant to you. And relevant to your future career. So that's something that, you know, candidates applying to both M7 and the international schools really need to focus on differently when working on their applications for Insead and London Business School.
And Emma, what are there any special qualities that you were looking for at LBS that might differ from what Caroline just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all those things that Caroline mentioned, you know, you look for those to come to the fore in somebody's application. You know, the admissions committee at LBS will be looking for analytical thinking capabilities, the ability to structure an argument, to put a point across succinctly and well. They're looking for a clear passion for the school. So somebody who really knows about the school, who's taken time to do research, who really, you know, when you're doing admissions, you talk about this sort of word fit, you know, and if you are in the business school world for any length of time, you get to know about that, and that is somebody that understands the culture of a school and what makes it different, you know, and whether or not that person is actually going to fit into that culture and is going to really engage with it. So LBS are really big on engagement, on bringing in a class who will, yes, excel academically, who will bring a value add in terms of their career to date, but also people who will contribute on campus. So they'll get involved, you know, in conferences, they'll bring in speakers, they'll be really motivated to make a difference while they're there. Because the general kind of assumption is that if you have somebody who comes into the class and the community and behaves like that while they're on campus, that when they go out as an alum, then they will, you know, continue to make a change as they go forward. So those things, definitely the international side of things that Caroline's already covered. But I think the other thing at LBS we used to look for was basically personality and charisma, because, you know, it's very easy to take a sort of paper application and look at it and sort of think, yeah, they look, you know, they tick all the right boxes. But then actually, you know, what are they like in an interview situation? Are they going to be able to persuade an employer that they want that, you know, top job in an MBA firm post-graduation? So that real kind of energy and ability to persuade others and inspire, and of course, you know, lead a team or you know, engage in a team, be involved in that environment. So quite an eclectic mix of things. And at the end, all of those kind of things do add up to this LBS fit, in the same way that, you know, Caroline will say there'll be an Insead fit. And there's crossover certainly between these two schools. And then, as she said, some crossover between these two schools and the M7 schools. But each school, you know, globally, every business school in the world will have what it sees as its own fit, and will be looking for its own particular type of candidates to make up its class.
You know, just sitting here listening to both you and Caroline describe the things that schools are looking for, makes me almost feel like you have to walk on water to get into a program. Now, certainly you don't have to check every single box, right?
No.
Because otherwise it feels incredibly daunting and almost a mission impossible.
Yeah, no, you don't at all. But I think, you know, schools are looking for people that do tick, you know, at least, you know, a good percentage of those boxes. And then, of course, you will have the wildcard candidates who will come in front of the admissions committee, and, you know, you'll look at this file and you'll think, wow, this person has a really unique value add, something that nobody else is bringing. You know, they might not have the top Gmat score, or they might not have, you know, 5 years of experience, but they have something that makes them special, and they will click and connect and engage and be part of our community and be a really great student. So no, you don't have to fill all those boxes. But having said that, it is a competitive business now, and as I was saying earlier, you know, LBS and Insead are just as competitive as the M schools, so you need to take time to pull your application together and think about those things that are unique to those two schools, and really, you know, try and nail it and do yourself justice.
No matter where you live in the world, Emma, everyone has read about Brexit. So it's sort of an unavoidable topic. And I know whenever I'm in London or the UK in general, I can't turn on the TV or listen to the BBC and not hear more about sort of almost violent positions on Brexit. Has that impacted the applications to London Business School and made it maybe perhaps a little bit easier to get in the last year or two?
No, it's actually the reverse to date. You know, I can't speak for what's going to happen in the next sort of 5 years or so. And the thing about Brexit that is so frustrating living here, or, you know, is that it's just rumbling on and on and on. And of course, the whole process is taking so much longer, I think, than anybody expected. Certainly, I think over the last 18 months or so, LBS saw a big uptick in their applications last year. Partly that was to do with the fact that the pound devalued, so the school, you know, became more affordable for a lot of people who perhaps had been put off by the cost of living in London and an expensive 2-year program. So that came down a bit, which increased the numbers. But I think, you know, I've been talking to quite a lot of candidates at Fortuna and clients who've come to us, And, you know, if they're applying to LBS and they're working with me, one of the first questions I get asked is, oh, what about Brexit? What does it mean for me when I graduate from LBS? And at the moment, it doesn't actually mean a whole lot. You know, I work with some other schools here in the UK as well, and I am, you know, part of the network with some of their admissions committees, and you know people that work within the schools, and there's just not a great deal of kind of terror, if you like, at the moment. People were initially concerned about, and certainly clients have been asking about jobs post MBA, but there's really not a lot to say at the moment. It's not impacted the numbers of people moving into the city post-degree at present. You can posit all sorts of, you know, potential end results, but really I think the answer is not many people know, because not many people really know what, you know, the UK post-Brexit is actually going to look like as yet. So I think the business schools are really just holding fire, and I think the impact to date is limited, to be fair.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. The other thing is, you know, all these concerns about whether or not the financial center of London, of Europe, will move from London. Well, if it does, so you'll get hired in other European capitals.
Exactly. And I honestly, I mean, yes, you know, there's been a smattering of sort of talk about banks moving some of their jobs, you know, perhaps to Frankfurt or to Paris or wherever, but I just can't see all the big firms like lifting up, you know, all the logistically lifting up all their offices and moving, you know, to Europe. And as you say, if there are key jobs that people want, they'll just simply go and work in continental Europe as opposed to here. And, you know, that's the thing about LBS, is that after graduation, it's such an international class. Lots of people go and work globally anyway. It's not like everybody stays here in the UK to work by any means.
Exactly. Caroline, let's turn to a perennial question that all applicants have. And this has become a bigger question as more and more schools are accepting GREs, and a higher percentage of the enrolled students were admitted by GRE. Is there a difference between taking a GMAT and a GRE? Does one give you a slight advantage over another in terms of admissions? And who should take the GMAT versus the GRE?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we often get asked. So for London Business School, the admissions committee is really agnostic. So take either test, that's absolutely fine. So, you know, what you could do is take a practice test. You know, if you haven't started down one route or the other yet, then you could take a practice test, both the GMAT and GRE, and see if either of the tests suits you better, all right? Because some people just find that they have a natural inclination to do better on one style of test than the other. So I would say, you know, go with a test that suits you the best, and you know, just you can do that by figuring out, you know, taking a practice test. However, for Insead, they have a distinct preference for the GMAT, and in fact, the school did have a more open policy with regard to the GRE, and they've backtracked on that. So now the official policy is they will only accept the GRE if the GMAT is not available where you live. And that's not the case for most applicants. So most people have the option to take the GMAT. So if Insead is on your list, then definitely you should be looking at the GMAT rather than the GRE.
Do you know why the school backtracked?
Yes, yeah. And I spoke to the admissions director about it because I thought it was a bit of a shame because you know, a lot of people are taking the GRE for other business schools, so they're kind of closing down part of the potential applicant pool for Insead. And she said that, you know, they admitted some students with a GRE, and they found that some of them had struggled academically. And it's true that, you know, Insead is a one-year program. In fact, you know, essentially it's 10 months, and you cover 80% of the curriculum that you would cover in a top 2-year program in those 10 months. So the pace is fast, it's incredibly intense. You know, you arrive and you have exams looming in 8 weeks' time, and every 8 weeks you have exams. And so there's not time to catch up. Or, you know, it's difficult if you get behind at the start to catch up later. And sometimes people do, but, you know, it's a big challenge. And so the admissions committee at Insead is actually, you know, often less flexible on the academic front than other top schools. You know, it's not always as flexible as, you know, even some of the, you know, the top US schools or London Business School. on the academic front, because they're just concerned about people's ability to get through that 1 year program. And so they have backtracked as regards the GRE, unfortunately.
I know at Yale, for example, when they look at GREs and they accept a fairly high percentage of students with them, over 20%, one of the highest of any school, of the really good schools, they require a higher quant number on the GRE and pay a little less attention to the total score to gain the assurance that people can do the core curriculum without any difficulty.
And certainly, I mean, at Insead, so when we started accepting the GRE, when I was admissions director there, I mean, we decided to set the bar a little bit higher in terms of percentiles on the GRE than on the Gmat. And partly, the Gmat is a test that was designed specifically for MBA, entry to MBA programs, whereas the GRE is used much more broadly. And I think, Insead has decided over time that it's not as strong a predictor of academic results as the Gmat. And, other schools may be seeing that as well. So it's not a bad idea to target, a slightly higher percentile on the GRE than you see students getting on the Gmat for that particular school.
Yeah. And of course, the benefit of accepting GREs is that more women have them. And more non-traditional students that many schools really want badly to attract. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Both schools, London Business School and Insead, now have a video component. Some people hate video, like me. Okay, here we are. We're recording this on video.
You look so good, John.
You two have instant charisma and the looks to be on national TV and the movies, but not me. So what can people expect in the video component at LBS and Insead? And do they differ in any meaningful way? Emma?
I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of the video component, it's a relatively new thing, still been going for a couple of years now. It's basically a way to bring you to life off a paper application. So the main interview for both schools is conducted by alumni. So the admissions committee are back in the office and you get feedback coming back from the alum after your interview. And that's a hugely useful sort of piece of feedback for the admissions committee, because as an alum, you are an ambassador for your brand, and it's your job as that ambassador to make sure that the person that you're interviewing is a good representative for your brand going forwards. Having said that, it's still, the admissions committee still haven't seen you, haven't seen your personality, haven't seen how you interact, how you engage. So when these video interviews were introduced, it was really a way of bringing the candidate to life. When I spoke to, to David Simpson about this at LBS, who's the admissions director, after they were introduced, and kind of talked to him about the rationale behind them. And I think the thing to remember is it's not meant to be a test. It's not meant to catch you out. It's more a way of looking at how you think on your feet. And you're quite right, not everybody enjoys speaking to camera and talking to a video. So it's a way of kind of seeing how people can relate and can put an argument together. LBS, for example, has a preset question which asks you about your core reasons for choosing the business school. So it's a way of learning a little bit more about how passionate you are about the program, what you know about, what makes it different from other schools. And then the second question is one chosen at random. And that's from a bank of questions. So it might be anything as simple as, what's your favorite book, to asking you your opinion on working in a multicultural environment. So they're quite different. You have to prepare quite well for the first one, and then for the second one, you have to be able to think on your feet. And you have to, have that knack, I guess, of not getting flustered and presenting your thoughts clearly. But having said that, it's not a deal breaker, I don't think, from an LBS point of view. Certainly, it's a way of adding to your profile and learning a bit more about you. For some candidates, it's a way of testing your English. So if you are going to struggle doing the video interview, then there's a pretty good indicator that perhaps you're not necessarily going to cope that well on the course. And there's a slight difference in procedure. So at Insead, you have to complete your video interview. I think it's within 48 hours, Caroline, of submitting your application. So everybody has to do it. At LBS, it's only people who are shortlisted to interview. So once you receive your email notifying you that you've been shortlisted to interview, you have some information sent to you about how to do your video interview, and you have, I think it's about a week to go online and record. I mean, I think from my own perspective, I think it's a great idea. I think it's definitely a really useful tool to the admissions committee to be able to go back and look at these and say, how does this person make me feel? Are they friendly? Are they communicative? Are they engaging? All those things that can be quite hard to assess until you suddenly have the person standing in front of you. So yeah, I think they're great.
Caroline, anything to add on the video interview?
Yeah, so I would say that it's often something that makes candidates quite anxious. And the thing to keep in mind is that they're not expecting a perfect performance. And Emma said that with LBS, you have a set question and then you have a random question. With Insead, you only get random questions, and there's a database of thousands of questions behind the scenes. So there's no way of predicting what question you're going to get, and some of them can be pretty specific. So you should certainly prepare to respond to typical MBA admissions questions, because you don't want to be tripping up if they ask a question about why you're applying to Insead. All right, so the obvious questions you should definitely have thought about beforehand, but you'll most likely get at least one question that you haven't thought about beforehand. And so, as Emma said, you need to be able to think on your feet, and just don't get too anxious if you feel that you haven't delivered the absolute perfect response, because most candidates are not delivering. You have 4 questions; they're not delivering 4 perfect responses. It's not something that they can prepare. They can't prepare the questions themselves beforehand. So you just need to prepare answering random questions and getting used to the format. And the timing is challenging because you have 45 seconds to prepare, which is not very long, and then 60 seconds to respond, and it will cut you off at the 60-second point. So we work with a lot of candidates preparing them for this, and some candidates, when you start preparing, they start responding to the question and they give a 30-40 second introduction to their response. So by the time they actually get to one of the main points, the videos cut them off. So learning how to manage the format and the timing is important, and that's really about practice beforehand.
And you get 4 questions at Insead?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's a question that a lot of people have, because a lot of people fall into these 2 buckets. If you are an investment banker or you are a management consultant, right, you're in a pool with a lot of highly competitive candidates. How do you stand out? Right.
Yes. Yeah. So it doesn't get any easier for common profiles, and there are other common profiles that you could add to that list. The IT engineers and so on. So my advice is ideally start thinking about it a year or 2 beforehand. And there are lots of things that you can do to distinguish your profile, but many of those things will take some time, and it's not always just about presentation. It's also about building a standout profile over time. And so, I love speaking to prospective candidates in the first year or 2 of their career when they're thinking about, well, maybe I'll apply to business school in 2 or 3 years time. And I just want to know now, how can I best prepare myself? And, I love having those conversations with candidates, because there's so much that they can do to be in a better position to apply when the time comes if they have a common profile. And so, for example, they need to look for opportunities to do projects or get work experience that will be a little bit different from what their peers will have done. So, for example, I worked with a client recently whose boss had gone out on maternity leave. And so, he had taken on her management role for an interim period and had done incredibly well in that position. So, that was a wonderful opportunity to step up, to take on a level of responsibility that wouldn't have otherwise had, and show what he was capable of. So, if you can get projects or work experience or work with clients that give you a bit of a different story to tell, versus other candidates, then that's going to be useful. And that's something that, you need to start preparing well ahead of time. And another example is, the extracurricular profiles, often with, investment bankers and management consultants and so on. They have a very demanding day job. They may be traveling a lot, and they may well have had, fantastic extracurricular profile from their undergraduate days, but that may have fallen by the wayside since they graduated. And if you can kind of kick that trend and actually show that you've done something substantial and worthwhile and reinvested yourself and engaged and continue to do that over time, then that's a wonderful opportunity to stand out versus your peers. So, my advice is start thinking about this as early as possible if you do have a common profile, because there are a lot of things that you can do to sort of gradually distinguish yourself. But that does take time. And then another thing is that, when we start working with candidates, the first thing we do is we get a complete download from them on their whole profile. So we ask them about all of their academic experience, all of their professional experience, all of their international experience, their career goals, and their various ambitions that they have for their career going forward, their values, their life story. We get the whole picture, so that, with all of that information, we can then, knowing what we know about the applicant pool for the schools that they're applying to, we can zone in on the elements that make them different versus other candidates in the pool. And that's not always easy for candidates to do individually. It's difficult when it's your own story to see the wood for the trees. They might not realize what it is that's actually a bit different about their own story versus someone else from a similar profile is also applying to the school. So I would say that, if you have a common profile, it's even more important to get someone else to, give you some strategic advice at the start of the process on, what is a little bit different about your story and how you can effectively position that to stand out in the pool.
Great advice. If you don't start early, you can't shape your candidacy because you have no time to do so. Emma, let's play a game. Let's pretend you're back at LBS and you're in the role of being in charge of MBA admissions. One of the things that every MBA admissions chief has to do is to basically assemble a diverse class. So give me a little understanding about how that's done. Does the Indian engineer therefore compete with the Wall Street banker or the consultant in Brussels?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the real skills to bringing in an MBA class is to make sure that you do have that kind of balance, that diversity. So in the first instance, and up to a point, yes, everybody is competing against everybody else. So, there are certain benchmarks, that need to be reached. The committee will look at academic and professional profile, your core competencies that will get you through the MBA program, and then your sort of extracurricular profile. But because then so much of the learning in an MBA class takes place, with your cohort, and I think that's something that sometimes people don't realise, that so much of the experience is about learning from the people that you are studying with, people who come from different industries, from different functions, who come from different cultures, who all have different ways of working. And for that sort of learning process to be achieved, you have to have this diverse and very balanced class. So as you kind of move through the process of selection, at some point you will come up against somebody else who has a similar profile to you, because, when you're choosing the class, you want some bankers, you want some entrepreneurs, you want some Indian, software engineers, you want some consultants. And at that point, yes, you do go up against somebody who looks similar to you on paper. So at that point, this thing of coming back to spending time and really putting together a solid application that shows who you are outside just your kind of professional capabilities is really important. And you have to be able to differentiate yourself. And you might think that you have a 760 Gmat and, you're away home and hosed, and that's just, not the case. It's about the whole person and sort of understanding what that individual is going to contribute. And then, of course, you know, as I said before, there's always these wonderful wild cards that come in. And I had a client recently at Fortuna who I worked with who was a very unusual profile. And with him, yes, he's you know, at the beginning assessed along with everybody else, you know, does he tick, you know, a certain number of boxes, but then it's up to him to prove his worth in his own kind of box, if you like. So yeah, I think there are two parts to the process. And in the first instance, yes, you're considered against everybody else just as a general whole, but as the kind of pipeline gets squeezed, somewhere you come up against other people who look similar to you.
Caroline, how important is it to apply early to LBS and Insead? And how does the competition look in each of the rounds? Is it stiffer early or later? What's your sense of that?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So both schools have 4 rounds. So it gives you a bit more flexibility than you have with the M7 schools. So with Insead, the school tries to keep the level of competition pretty much equal across the rounds. But having said that, you know, there's often a squeeze in the final round. So, you know, round 1, round 2, round 3, there's not going to be much difference. Round 4, there can be, especially for common profiles. All right. So, you know, I would advise someone who doesn't have a very distinctive profile to avoid round 4. And the school has 2 intakes per year. So, you know, there's the January entry and there's the September entry. So, you know, you've got a lot of rounds over the years, 8 rounds over the years. So, you know, you should be able to apply at a good time for your profile. With London Business School, so the 4 rounds, there's the 1 entry per year. They can be a squeeze in round 3 already. And, you know, candidates at that point are hitting up against candidates that were waitlisted earlier in the process. You know, especially if you've got a common profile, we would advise you to apply in round 1 or round 2 rather than round 3 or round 4.
Great.
Having said that, just apply when you're ready, because, you know, Emma and I, you know, when we were working at our respective schools, you know, you see too many candidates who apply in a rush because they're just desperate to meet a specific deadline, and you can tell that they've thrown things together at the last minute and they really do themselves a disservice. So, you know, and it's frustrating as an admissions director to have to ding someone because, you know, they've presented themselves poorly when you can see that the raw material is actually pretty good and you would like them to try it a little bit harder. So, you know, make sure that you take the time you need to prepare well rather than rushing to meet a specific deadline.
Right. Okay, and soon we're going to turn to a few questions that are piling up from our audience. But first, let me ask you this question, Emma. You've seen thousands of applications. What are the most common mistakes that candidates make in applying to London Business School, and in fact, all elite business schools that are highly selective?
I would say that the 2 top mistakes, the first one is rushing an application. And, you know, as Caroline was just saying, and I think, you know, that becomes so evident in weak essays where clearly the candidate hasn't spent time reflecting on their career goals. So they haven't really thought through, you know, why the MBA is right for them at this point in their career. They haven't put time thinking about what they want to do immediately post MBA, then, you know, where that's going to take them in their career trajectory as they, you know, in the 5 years and 10 years after they graduate. When you rush, you know, and this is something we see, you know, with candidates, and that's people who come to us late, and we help them take that time and make sure that they don't just suddenly, you know, rush in, that we say, you know, stop, think, reflect, think about who you are, what your story is, because if you don't, you do yourself this enormous disservice. And, you know, rushed applications, you'll get errors in essays. You know, you'll get the fabulous one that almost every admissions committee member has seen, which is an essay about LBS, and then it'll talk about Harvard at the bottom or something. And you know that it's just a generic essay that's being produced from school to school. And it's an instant ding because, you know, for a number of reasons. And then I think, so rushing an application and not taking time to position yourself well and think about, you know, how you're presenting yourself would be the main one. I think the other big mistake is people who think that because they have a strong Gmat and a good job, that they are just going to waltz in. So they don't think about the rest of themselves. They don't think about sort of presenting the qualities that an admissions committee might be looking for. They don't round out their profile. They can, you can look at a file and say, yes, they have, stellar academics. Yes, they have a good, strong Gmat. Yes, okay, the essay is fairly solid and it ticks all the right boxes. Yes, their application form, again, fairly solid, ticks all the right boxes. But, when you then come back to the question you asked earlier about when you start butting up against someone of the same profile, if you then have someone who's really gone the extra mile, they've maybe taken that optional LBS essay and used it to talk about a startup they were involved in, or, when they led their undergraduate rugby team to victory, in a tournament for the first time, or whatever it might be. Those are the things that show your personality. And for people who don't bother to do that, and there are a surprising number who just don't think that admissions committees are interested in anything outside that core kind of professional level, that just, these days, it just doesn't get you through. You don't tend to make the cut because there are people who do spend time and who do really understand what schools are looking for and who have gone, the extra mile to do their research and understand the culture. So I think rushing and then doing a bland application that doesn't show your personality, probably the two top errors that I would sort of see, yeah.
Okay, last question before we get to our Q&A. So if you're planning to apply in the coming admission season, how should you get started, and what should be your timeline or plan of action? Caroline? Emma? Both?
Do you want to start, Emma, and then I'll chip in?
Yeah, I guess we would say it's never too soon. Caroline mentioned before about people she's spoken to who are 2 or 3 years out from actually applying. At this point in the year, if you haven't really started thinking about it, but you're planning to apply for the coming season, we would say get on it. You do have an advantage applying in the early rounds because the school has not received applications from people from your kind of profile. So you come in, as a new shiny application. When we work with our clients, we work on an application strategy in the first instance. So we get people to sort of go through that period of self-reflection, work out, which particular schools they're looking to apply to, get them to do their research, get them to reach out to people at the schools. And of course, if you start early, you have time to visit, you have time to network and reach out to people that who are current students, who might be alumni who work in your company or however you're going to play that. We get people around about now really to reach out to their recommenders because they can take forever, and the last thing you want is to be ready to push submit in September for Insead or LBS and your recommender is still not on board or hasn't done it because they've gone away for their summer holiday all of August or whatever it might be. And then we work on CVs and make sure that that's in the right kind of format for an MBA school application, and at Fortuna we have a wonderful CV expert who helps us do that. And then really only once all of that is kind of underway and sort of together, then we start looking at applications and essays. And of course, essays, I can't stress enough how important it is to take time with those and to draft and redraft. And you can't write a successful MBA essay overnight and just fire it off. I just don't believe that's possible, unless maybe you're, some incredible writer that we've never seen before, but I don't think that's the case. So the message is to start early and get going on it now, really. Caroline, I think, we've all seen the issues with late applications.
Absolutely, on both sides of the fence. I would just add to that, it would be great if candidates could get the GRE or the Gmat out early, because it's often the case that it takes longer than you think to get the score that you would like, and so build that buffer time into your timeline. And if you know that often candidates start thinking about applying to business school a few years in advance, so and your GMAT score is valid for 5 years, so just bite the bullet and get it done well ahead of time, because you'll be in a much better position. And it can be very tough to juggle all of this work that Emma's talked about that you need to do to be a good candidate and prepare a good application, as well as the GMAT, as well as your day job and everything else. So, get the test out the way.
And I think just to add, sorry, John, I was just going to say, to add to that, if you do it early and you fluff it for whatever reason, then you have time to retake. And an extraordinary number of people do retake that test or those tests, 2 or 3 times. So, and there's no shame in that, but you need to have time to do that if you need to.
Okay, do you two like secrets? I love secrets. And our first
Are you going to tell us
question,
your secrets now, John?
our first questioner actually wants you to spill some secrets. So he asks, what are the top secrets that admission committees will not share with you that are in fact used to evaluate candidates? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I can start. I mean, I think schools try to be as transparent as possible about what they're looking for, because, the school doesn't do itself any favors if, they're communicating one thing about what they're looking for, and then in actual fact, they have some sort of secret process behind the scenes that, where they're eliminating candidates and candidates don't know why they're being eliminated on that basis. So I think schools do really try hard to communicate, what they're looking for and tell candidates as much as they can about the admissions process. So I don't think that there are many secrets about, what schools are looking for, and it's, they're looking for strong candidates across the board. And, it's often a case of who else is applying at the same time and who you're being compared to. As Emma said, and that's something that you can't predict and the admissions committee can't predict. So, that there's always that unknown factor in the application process. You just have to take the effort to get to know the school and really understand fundamentally what it is that they're about and what they're looking for and how you fit with that school. So there's no sort of secret recipe, unfortunately.
So, the Beatles once sang, "Do you want to know a secret?" We're telling you there really are very few secrets, if any, in the MBA admissions process. You either have it or you don't.
I think also, LBS has become more transparent even since, the time that I worked there in terms of feedback to candidates. I think usually if you are dinged, often you will have, sometimes you don't know why, but often you might have an inkling, you might be aware that there's a weakness. LBS now will tell you if you are waitlisted, they'll write to you and say, well, actually, if you do your Gmat again and bump your score up a bit, that might help your application. That never used to be the case. So that they are trying to be as helpful and as transparent as possible, because at the end of the day, they want the best possible class. All the schools do. So it's not really in their interests to have secrets. It's, they want the admissions process to be as friendly as possible and to be, to engage with you and to help get the best people in.
Great. Here's a question a lot of people have, and I think it's a pretty legitimate question. What is a quote unquote safe Gmat score to apply to at LBS and Insead? Should one merely look at the average, and if you hit the average, there's no need to retake it, that you're pretty much okay? What's your sense of that?
Well, you start, Caroline.
So I'll start. So Insead likes to see 75th percentile or above on both the quant and the verbal, and they look more at that breakdown than at the total score. Other schools will often look at the total score and give that more weight than the percentile breakdown. So that's something to keep in mind. If your score is at the average for the school or very close, then then you're a competitive candidate. But it also does depend on the rest of your profile. So if you're if you're a management consultant, you're working at McKinsey, then they're going to expect a high Gmat, right? Those candidates typically do very well on the Gmat. You should have very good analytical skills if you're working at a firm like that. And so, the expectation is there that you will do very well. And if you don't, they'll wonder why. On the other hand, if you come from a bit of an unusual background for business school, they may be a bit more flexible on the Gmat requirements. If you have a common profile, a lot of Indian candidates applying to business school, the average Gmat score for Indians at schools like Insead and London Business School is going to be quite a bit higher than the average for the student body as a whole. So
are we looking at like 20, 30 points
well,
higher?
Not necessarily, but I would say, 10 plus points higher on average for that particular demographic. So you need to be aware of your competition and where you stand in the applicant pool. I mean, also if you've been to, a stellar undergraduate institution and you've got a fantastic GPA, then they're going to be a bit more flexible on Gmat than if you have a poor academic record. If there's any concern about your undergrad, then you better have an above average Gmat. You need to compensate for that. So it varies by profile.
And I'm assuming the same is true at LBS.
It is, yeah. I think just the other thing to add to that is that if you come from a liberal arts background and you don't have quant skills evident in your undergraduate degree, then it's even more important that you try to get your quant score up to a reasonable level, because that's really then going to be the only indicator that the admissions committee has in terms of how well you're going to cope with those really sort of nasty, gritty finance courses. So yeah, and I think the other thing to be aware of is it's part of a whole, but all the schools, and that includes LBS and Insead, have watched those scores inch up and up and up and up, and the average goes up every year, and Insead and LBS are no exception. So in the same way that we were talking about at the beginning, that they are just as competitive now, those scores need to be, you need to work on those as well. You can't leave them to the last minute and just think, oh, well, it's just LBS or it's just Insead and 650 will definitely be fine. It doesn't work that way, and it does depend on the rest of your profile.
The next question deals with the video component. And the questions are, what are the biggest mistakes applicants make in doing the video? And number two, what's the best thing a candidate can actually do to, put himself or herself at an advantage in the video component?
Right, I'll start there. So I would say, I mean, I see people preparing for this, and typically when they start preparing for this exercise, they struggle a lot with the specific format. So it's the timing, it's the complete sort of randomness of the question. It's also, that you've got to talk at a screen which is recording you. You don't see a person. So it's kind of, the school's trying to replicate an interview experience, but there's no human connection there. And therefore, it's hard to be authentic and be natural in the same way that you would if you're sitting across the table from an interviewer. And when you're speaking to someone, you sort of can gauge their reaction, whether they're interested or not in what you're saying. And you don't get that feedback from a computer screen. So that can be a bit unnerving. And so you need to get used to it. So I would say, the practice is really important. And the schools give you access to the video platform ahead of time. You can practice as much as you want. As I said, we also do practice sessions for candidates and give them feedback. So, getting the hang of it is really important. You can't necessarily prepare for the specific question that you will get, but you can prepare for the format. And just getting a feel for what does 60 seconds feel like, so that you're not, you don't see that you're at second 59 on the screen and you've only got to your first point and you've got two other points that you wanted to make, you're going to get cut off. So just having a feel for the format so that you're comfortable with it when you do the actual video recordings is my top advice.
Okay, and here's a question that's going to test the loyalty of both Emma and Caroline to their institutions. So let's try this on Emma. In comparison to Insead, does LBS have a more quote-unquote conducive environment for people seeking entrepreneurship post-MBA?
Okay, so from my own perspective, I'm very loyal to LBS. I worked there for a long time. I have family members that have done their degrees there. I still have a very good connection with the school. So I am very loyal. I think LBS does focus a lot on entrepreneurship. It has its wonderful entrepreneurship summer school that runs in between the first and second year of the program. It's obviously sorry, Caroline, its location in the centre of London and access that you have to, you know, to the startup environment and the really buzzy nature that, you know, of London is a big plus, I think. But I also think that if you come to business school and you have a startup idea and you want some time to perhaps think about it, test it out in a safe environment, and perhaps also find someone else to maybe, you know, that you want to join up with as a business partner, I do think potentially that the 2-year option has its pluses. It's, you know, a 1-year program is fantastic if you want to just, you know, get in, as Caroline said, you know, do your 10 months, get everything in a very intensive format, and then zoom out with lower opportunity costs and lots of pluses, you know, into your job post MBA. But I think if you are perhaps germinating an idea, or you're looking to business plans, etc., then I think LBS might have the edge for entrepreneurship, but I'm sure Caroline's got...
Caroline, you have a rebuttal?
Very good point, Sam. Now, I would just say that, I mean, there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity at Insead. So, you know, about 80% of students are taking at least one elective in entrepreneurship. So there's a lot of interest in it. There's a lot of different courses, a lot of opportunities to pursue an entrepreneurial route. So there's definitely, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of the school, and about 50% of alumni are engaged in entrepreneurial activities at some point during their career post MBA. So it is a huge part of what the school is about. I would agree that, you know, for some people, the 2-year program just, you know, gives you a bit more time to work things through. So 1-year program does go very, very fast. And, you know, having those connections into the London startup community can be useful. You know, on the other hand, with Insead, you have, you know, there's a very entrepreneurial community in Singapore, and, you know, and a global community as well around you. So I think, you know, both schools see increasing interest in their applicants in pursuing an entrepreneurial route, which is, I think, is fantastic. And, you know, both schools are very switched into that and you know, looking to cultivate it.
Okay, we're just over the hour, but we have a few more questions that we're going to try to get in before we put an end to this. And Caroline, here's a rather technical question for you. How valuable is the Insead internship in the January intake? For someone with a common profile who wants an internship, is it worthwhile to apply in January intake round 4? And if you get dinged, reapply for September intake round 1?
Right. So I do like the internship option. I mean, when I did the MBA, I started in January and I did an internship, which gave me exposures. I worked in Singapore over the summer period, and I was looking to make a transition into Asia. So that was a really useful stepping stone for me. And that's something that students often find. On the other hand, when the school analyzes, you know, the amount of career change and the career paths of candidates coming in for the September entry versus the January entry, and then what they do when they go out, actually there's as much career change going on for the September entry, which does not have the internship option, as there is for the January entry. So despite the fact that the January class does not have the internship option in the middle of the program, they're still achieving a lot of change in their career. One exception to that is if you want to make a switch into investment banking, I would definitely advise you to start in the January class, because that class is aligned to the recruitment cycle for summer internships for the banks, and they use that as a recruitment mechanism. And you could miss out in making that career switch if you start in January. It's just a little bit harder. So that's one career path where, you know, the January entry is definitely advisable. So you know, it's really a personal choice, but, you know, be aware that, you know, you can still make a lot of change even if you're not able to do that internship. Whether it's worthwhile to apply in January round 4 or to and then risk getting dinged. I mean, it depends on your profile. The school is very open to reapplications. So, and they've, you know, recently changed how they communicate on the reapplication policy. So in the past, the school was quite standoffish as regards reapplications, and had some quite strong language about it on the school website, and they've softened the tone considerably, and so they're happy to receive reapplications, but you do need to show some sort of evolution. So the risk is if you apply in round 4 and you get dinged and you reapply with exactly the same application later on, then their temptation is going to be to give you the same decision, right? So if you're reapplying, you do need to take into account that they want to see some sort of evolution in your candidacy, in your profile, and how you present yourself at that later date. So you might need to think about whether that's going to be something that's feasible for you.
Okay, last question. What is one common misperception that applicants tend to have about LBS and Insead? Emma?
I think probably it comes back full circle quite nicely to what we talked about at the beginning, and that is that the European schools generally, and LBS and Insead, are not as rigorous or competitive as the US schools, which I just don't think is the case anymore. Certainly, as we've seen, as I said, numbers go up. They're just as competitive. You need to have a very thoughtful, detailed application to get in, and then the programs themselves are rigorous academically, in the course and curriculum. LBS specifically, I still sometimes hear people say it's a finance school, and that's just not true anymore. It has definitely got a strong finance faculty. It has the wonderful Masters in Finance programs part and full-time. But now, there are just as many people going into different areas, the big tech firms going into consulting, more people going into those areas that are, that are specifically going into finance. So I think, you shouldn't write off any particular school now as one type of school or another, because the people who design the curriculums are working super hard all the time to sort of stay at the forefront of change and to make sure that the programs are evolving, as quickly as they can, and also answering what I guess the students are seeking. So LBS had a big curriculum change last year and involved and introduced a whole number of courses on data analytics and that were more tech focused, because that is what students coming in were looking for. So I think certainly that's probably the two that I would come up with initially.
Caroline, you have a perspective on that?
Yes, so a couple of things. So as Emma said, LBS gets frustrated as being known as the finance school. Insead gets frustrated as being known as the school for management consultants. So, a lot of people do come from management consulting or go and work in those firms post Insead, but there's vast numbers of students going to other career paths as well and coming from other backgrounds. So it really is a general management degree. People pursuing incredible variety of career paths post MBA. And another thing is that Insead sometimes talked about as a European school. The campus in Singapore has been a huge success. It was established 18 years ago now, and it's really a parallel campus to Fontainebleau. In fact, not all students would ever necessarily go to Europe as part of their Insead experience. You can do the entire program in Singapore, you can go to exchange to the Abu Dhabi campus, you can exchange to a school in the US. So there's no requirement to set foot in Fontainebleau. And the school is truly global. So it's very much an international experience rather than a European experience.
Great. Listen, I think we had a really terrific, productive session. I want to thank Caroline. I want to thank Emma. I also want to thank Haley in the background for running the technical stuff. If you've enjoyed the session and would like to more deeply absorb the different opinions and perspectives that Caroline and Emma provided, you can just go to fortunaadmissions.com and find the archived video of the session. If you happen to tune in during the middle, the end, or had to log off because your boss is peeking over your shoulder, you can also obviously see the video edition as well. We have a few more of these coming up where we will focus on some other highly selective top schools and we'll feature Fortuna admission consultants who've been in the admissions committee room at those schools and have reviewed and evaluated candidates and can give us the nitty-gritty, if not the secrets, of how to get in. So thank you one and all for attending. I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. I hope you have a great day and a good start to your new MBA journey. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.